Hello and welcome to the Allplane Podcast. Today we have here as a guest someone that knows the dynamics of the aviation industry inside out. When it comes to the business of aircraft making, few people are as knowledgeable as Addison Schonland. He's the co-founder, together with business partner Ernie Arvey, of AirInsight, an aviation consultancy and media company that monitors closely the commercial aviation industry. I have known Addison already for quite some time and have had the chance to collaborate with him and with AirInsight as a contributor a number of times. You can find these writings, as well as many other reports, analysis, and news about the aviation industry on their website, AirInsight.com. That's AirInsight.com. So, at the time in which the commercial aviation faces what is possibly the most cataclysmic crisis in its history, I thought it would be a great idea to reach out to Addison in Maryland, where he is based, in order to get some of his insights about the current state of the aviation manufacturing industry and his thoughts about its future. So, without further ado, let me introduce our guest today. Hello, Addison. How are you?
Great. Thank you, Miguel. Thank you for inviting me.
Those are strange times, aren't they?
Yeah, I think that this has to be, for the people, what I describe as the aviation silo, commercial aviation silo. I think this is going to be the worst experience anybody has had. We had previous, we've had previous shocks before, like, N1H1, we've had SARS, we've had 9/11. There've been shocks to the system, but it's never been uniform and global at once.
Yes.
And this is a perfect storm. It's horrible.
Indeed. And for some industry players, it's just compounding some existing issues, right? So thinking about Boeing now and the Boeing 737 MAX debacle,
Well, it's interesting. It's interesting you say that, because I think in a way this is very helpful, because it gives Boeing time to work on the MAX. Their customers are not screaming for deliveries now. In fact, hundreds of them those orders have been canceled. So Boeing is a very special case, I should say, for what we're experiencing right now, particularly on the MAX.
Yeah, I was thinking about this the other day. This situation obviously is terrible, but for some people that were in trouble before it started, it actually put things in the freezer. Thinking Alitalia, for example, that under different circumstances, it would have been much harder to get government support.
I think that for those of us who watch this industry, we all shake our heads when we hear the word Alitalia. That, a cat has 9 lives. Alitalia has probably got 99.
True.
It's unbelievable.
True.
How that company continues to exist, it's amazing to me.
Mm-hmm.
Because quite honestly, without government support, they've got nothing. That means that as a business, the company doesn't have what it needs to perform. It's just a company that is structurally so damaged. And of course, I think when we look throughout the industry from one side to the other, in the airline world, certainly, state-owned airlines generally fail. The exceptions are obviously the Gulf, the 3 big Gulf carriers, which are special cases.
Mm-hmm.
But you've seen it in South Africa. You see it all across Africa. You've seen it in Greece. We've seen it in several places. State-owned airlines that are used as a place to put friends who vote. And it becomes a place to park people that are your friends.
I was surprised actually that South Africa let South African Airways fall. You were originally from South Africa, right?
Correct.
How do you see the whole situation? Is South Africa going to be left without a national airline, quote unquote?
I hope so. The situation in South Africa is clearly, when I was living there, it was the previous regimes, shall we say.
Mm-hmm.
I left in 1987. But what you have there now is a government that doesn't seem to be able to get much right. And running an airline is a complicated thing. And COVID just makes it so much worse. In South African Airways case, there was also political interference and, quite frankly, incompetence from the top down. So the company has been very poorly managed, and it's been managed by political talent rather than intellectual talent who understand the airline business.
Mm-hmm.
That's not to say that there aren't people there that understand the airline business. They are. But you see, when you have a situation, and South Africa is probably a good example. I had a conversation with a man who runs CEMAIR, CEMAIR, and anybody who's listening to this wants to take a look at that video. It's on the AirInsight.com site.
Mm-hmm.
And he makes an interesting point. He's trying to run a private company, a private airline, privately funded, and his competitor is state-owned. And every time they make a mistake, the state will take care of it. They have a bank that the checks don't bounce. All of a sudden, the government, I think, in South Africa realizes you've got to stop the bleeding. It's insane. We can't afford this, because every time we put money into the airline, everybody else that has a state corporation puts their hand out and says, well, what about me?
Mm-hmm.
And there's no government in the world that can keep writing checks. It just doesn't work. And of course, that leads us to this whole COVID thing and how the infinite quantitative easing in economies, I would say most people do not remember what inflation was like.
True. Yeah.
They are about to rediscover the monster of inflation, because you cannot keep pouring money into a global economy and there's no demand.
Mm-hmm.
It's too much. As a classic example, the language that I learned when I was doing economics, too much money chasing too few goods. The value of money is going to collapse, and it's going to cause even the cure is going to be for COVID might well be worse than COVID itself in economic terms. And that should be terrifying for most people when they see the damage that's happening now with just worrying about COVID. We haven't even thought about, you come out of COVID and now you've got massive inflation,
mm-hmm.
and you can't afford to buy anything.
And talking about supply and demand, talking about aircraft manufacturing, are there going to be enough buyers for all jets that Airbus and Boeing are producing?
The short answer is no. And the reason is twofold. Firstly, there is no demand for travel. The Chinese started rebuilding their schedules, but they don't have the traffic. People are afraid to travel. It's going to be the same outside of China. Everybody keeps talking about a V recovery and that there's this pent-up demand for travel. Well, maybe, but if you look at, the US as the TSA daily count, we're still down around, let's say, an average of 95% less traffic than we had a year ago. And they're trying to open up and people fly again, but people are scared because you know what? COVID can kill you. And if it doesn't kill you, it could kill someone who you come into contact with. You might just have a sneeze or a headache, but this particular virus can do terrible things to people that you run into in your families. How urgent is it to travel? You and I are doing something now on this using Zoom technology. I think that when we see how much we can accomplish using technology like this, business travel shrinks big time. Now, if you take business travel out of the travel equation, remember 80% of the money for an airline comes from 20% of their customers, the old 80-20 rule, and that 80% of the revenue is coming from business travelers. When you take, let's say people decide, I'm going to do 10%, 20%, 30% less business travel than I used to do because I can use technology. What do you think it does to the airline business? Terrible, but it's a terrible outcome. The next thing is you've got very cheap oil, and it doesn't look like we're going to have expensive oil for a long time. So all those old planes that are gas guzzlers,
mm-hmm.
Sorry, Greta, Greta might not like this, but the fact is cheap oil means old planes. You don't need new ones that are fuel efficient. Why would you buy them?
We are seeing many airlines withdrawing from service as well, planes that are actually still quite serviceable and quite new, right? So how do you see the industry going from here, especially the two main players, Boeing and Airbus?
The first thing is that when we look at airlines like Delta, and we've seen it not only at Delta, we've seen it obviously at British Airways, international airlines that have lots of long-haul flying, for which there is zero demand, you don't need long-haul airplanes. You just don't need them. Mm-hmm. And the pilots that fly them, by the way, are senior. So they're very expensive. They're making top dollar. So Delta's decision to park its 777s, firstly, there's only 18 of them in their whole fleet. So it's not a big impact in terms of the number of airplanes. However, Delta has 15 pilots per airplane on average.
15.
So you can figure out, 18 planes times 15 pilots each. That'll give you an idea of how many senior pilots are going to be also parked in a way. So British Airways is parking their 747s. Even Emirates is parking their 380s. Until we can form bubbles. I guess you've heard, I know you do a lot of travel stuff, Miguel. Have you heard of this concept of bubbles, travel bubbles?
Yes.
Okay, so now
some safe areas between two or more countries. There was talk about Australia, New Zealand.
That's
this
it.
week, the Baltics announced also another bubble between Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania. Mm-hmm.
So until we have a bubble between, let's say, the United States and, I don't know, pick a country, the United Kingdom or the EU in general.
Yes.
Once a bubble like that exists, then you will see long-haul flying be reintroduced, but very, very carefully.
Yeah.
You will not see 777s and that like necessarily used quickly. What you will see is 321s, single aisle across the Atlantic. Because here's the thing, airlines are bleeding cash. So the number one priority at every single airline is conserve money. Mm-hmm. So anything that means money out the door is held back. If you're a supplier to an airline right now, or a supplier to somebody in this whole silo, you're not going to get a check for a while. You just have to sit and wait for your money, because you know what? No one has any. As one of the people I've been speaking to explains to me that if you imagine the commercial aviation silo as a funnel, at the top of the funnel is money in. Where does the money come from that sustains this industry? It's from passengers and from people who buy or require freight. There's no money coming in the top of the funnel. So everybody down that funnel, and of course the further down the funnel you are, the worse it is, you're getting no money, no water, nothing. Nothing is coming down that funnel.
So that would lead...
Go ahead.
No, I just wanted to ask about how this situation would affect the airlines that already... some airlines already have these efficient single-aisle, relatively long-range aircraft like the A321neo. Are they then better positioned for this post-pandemic world? And also, how does this affect Boeing's longer-term plans? Because Boeing, they had now the 777X now undergoing tests, and they recently announced that they might be, they were dropping this NMA concept as a new plane, but they might be considering a revamp of the 757 to compete with the 321. So how do you see all this evolving over the next few years, all this whole situation in this space?
All right, to answer your first question about those airlines that have the 321, they have the right tool to be able to fly the right size capacity, meaning it's a capacity that they could sell. It's low risk. For example, in the US, we see Delta has not parked one of its A220s. It's a 110-seater. They parked almost everything else, but the A220 is an airplane that they can make work in the current economic environment. As a whole, the airline is losing money, a lot of money, probably $50 million a day. But there are certain tools that just work really well. Another tool that would work in that kind of size for service would be the Embraer's E-Jets. American has only 20 of them and has parked them because 20 doesn't really help them. Delta has about just around 30 of the A220s, which is something that's working for them. So the decision at American is a little bit odd. In terms of Boeing, they clearly have missed a step by not replacing the 757 on time with the NMA. The NMA solution had been up to now a family with two sizes, and they've taken so long to figure out what they want to do that they've kind of missed the boat. And you'll see people like United and American and Delta that were all big Boeing customers, they've all flipped over to the 321. And these are 20-year decisions. You don't make a decision on an asset like that for 5 years. it's a 20-year commitment. And once you train pilots, you train mechanics, everybody involved in the very complicated business of running an airline becomes oriented towards this airplane, because that's the one they're going to be working on for the next 20 years, which for a lot of people could be an entire career in this industry. It's a very fundamental shift. It's a very bad situation for Boeing also, that the MAX 9 and the MAX 10 cannot fly, because that would have been their attempt to try and have a product that could compete. We're not there right now.
What about the 777X? What perspectives do you see for this plane in this environment?
Okay, so that's a difficulty. That's a difficulty, because the 777X really is, a good-sized airplane in a very much of a niche market. Once you get over 400 seats, it seems that market has shrunk quite a lot. There are very few customers for the 777X, and it's probably going to stay that way for some time. So Boeing doesn't have any option. They're deep into the project. They have to finish it and get it certified. But we see, for example, there's almost no interest in the Dash 8. Only there's interest in the Dash 9. And the Dash 9 interest is very specific. There are like a handful of airlines that are looking at that airplane. It's too early to tell, because, again, if we look back, there's very little in our history that can teach us how we're going to come out of this pandemic.
True.
Every day, I was saying to somebody yesterday that everything that you were thinking about commercial aviation in January and February, in March, it totally turned upside down. And what we have today is the questions are all the same. No one's asking different questions. Everybody has the same question, but the answers change day to day, week to week, depending on circumstances. Who would have thought that at the best time possible, oil prices collapsed? Imagine if oil prices collapsed in January and February, how much money the airlines would have been making. It didn't happen then, it happened now. It's we have a perfect storm of things. I want to be careful about not using language that sounds like overused. People in the pandemic have all been looking for these huge, overused words, but we're in uncharted waters here. I hate to use that term as well. There is no other way to describe it. Who can you turn to that can give you 100% confident guide in this situation? I don't know such a person.
Continuing a little bit with this Boeing thing, what sense does this whole Embraer thing make? I'm not totally sure I understood what's going on here. I mean, I remember we were in Toulouse some time ago, and you told me that when this deal with between Airbus and Bombardier was announced for what is now the 220. And you told me how you thought that was a great deal for Airbus, and Boeing had been caught off guard. So I guess the Embraer thing was kind of a rush response to this. We have seen they broke up. Do you have any theories about this?
Oh, theories.
Yeah.
Theories for sure.
Yeah.
Okay, so firstly, we know that Embraer and Boeing have been friends for a long time before they did anything. And I'll tell you one of the little clues that would point this out. If you look at the new wing on the E2, look at the shape at the end of the E2's wing. It looks just like you would see on a 777 or a 787. It's got that raked back tip. They look like they came from the same parents. If Boeing didn't like Embraer, there would have been a lawsuit for sure about some sort of a patent. But you know what? Nothing happened. It was, for some of us, that was a clue that something was going on, that they were more friendly than then appeared publicly. After Airbus got what I would call the finest deal in the history of commercial aviation, buying 51% of a program for $1 Canadian. I mean, that is just, I still think about that. It's an incredible deal. But Airbus they moved quickly, and they got what, in this particular case, first mover advantage. Now, let's dial forward to where we are with Embraer. Embraer had to make this thing work, to make the idea of Boeing Brazil work. Embraer had to literally tear itself apart. The commercial aviation part of the company had to separate from the defense and the other technologies that they have under this one corporation. A lot of money. People had to decide which side are you going to be on. And they split themselves, and they did what they had to do, according to them. Boeing says, well, they didn't live up to what was required for them to do. Obviously, that's subject to a lawsuit now or arbitration, and both sides feel that they're entitled. The thing is, from the outside, and it's very important that this is a theory from the outside, that I mentioned that, right now, it doesn't really look like people believe Boeing. Boeing, unfortunately, has done some strange things that people don't quite trust that what you hear from Boeing anymore. The MAX thing has done the company terrible damage. And also, you look at what Embraer put itself through. The bride got herself done up, got new clothes, got her hair done, beautiful, ready to go. And the groom decided, no, I've changed my mind. It changed your mind at the last minute. It is incredibly destructive. You can imagine the consternation and the frustration and the anguish in Brazil, because as I've heard people at Embraer tell me time and again, it's very hard for them to compete with Airbus. When they try and sell an E2, they have to sell against Airbus. An example here is JetBlue. JetBlue had been an Embraer customer for a long time, and they were very, very close to buying the E2 to replace their E190s. Then at the last minute, Airbus came along and said, you've got all these 320 Neos on order. Let's modify that deal. We will convert those to 321 Neos, which are going to be the better airplane for you because you want to fly across the Atlantic. And we'll make you a deal. And oh, by the way, as part of this deal, you take the 220 instead of the E2. Well, how does Embraer compete with that? They don't have a big product. The E195 is their biggest offering. Airbus, on the other hand, can offer a whole family of solutions to JetBlue. So if you're JetBlue, what are you going to do? Of course, you're going to go with the Airbus solution because they come with a left foot, right foot, left hand, right hand solution. And Embraer's only got one hand or one foot to offer. It's an impossible thing for Embraer to compete against.
Two thoughts here. What about first competition issues? And if Airbus all of a sudden becomes a sort of a monopolistic in this segment? And the other one is actually like the production capacity. How long do airlines, or did airlines, I mean, maybe this will change now, but how long did airlines have to wait to get airplanes if there's only actually one supplier producing them? Wouldn't this be an issue?
Well, firstly, I don't think that Airbus will take a monopolistic view on anything. It's a very dangerous game to play. Both Airbus and Boeing have long, they started off at the beginning of the year with 7-year backlogs. Those backlogs have obviously been cut big time. We also know that the backlog is not only going to be cut because people don't need planes like they thought they would, but there's a lot of airplanes in the desert that you can pull out and now use. You will, if you and I were running an airline right now, we would take the existing fleet we have and we would literally fly it until they break. We will wear out the airplanes because you know what? It's going to be cheaper. We don't care what fuel costs because fuel is so low. What we're terrified right now is we need to get revenue. And the only way an airline gets revenue is it sells flying hours, whether it's to passengers or to freight. They've got to sell flying hours. And you want to produce a flying hour as cheaply as possible. A new plane is not a way to do as cheaply as possible if fuel is where it is today. So the first issue is I don't think Airbus would take a monopolistic view. However, when you look at something like a 321 compared to, let's say, a MAX 9 or 10, you would think that there's price competition. But in fact, it's very hard for Boeing to make any kind of deals because the customer's going to say, okay, well, when can I get delivery? And Boeing can say, I don't know, because we have to get the plane certified again.
Yeah.
Airbus, on the other hand, has probably got a better timeline that they can give you for a delivery. But remember, Miguel, this is a long-term business. This is 20 years at a time. You don't want to irritate people and break relationships that are going to be necessary for 20 years over a deal around a pandemic like this. The pandemic will come to an end. It may take a year, it may take more, but a year or two out of 20, you don't want to be that guy that people will remember as taking advantage. These are long-term relationships.
And What's the role for the other competitors? Thinking here about Japan, about China, Russia. Each of them have also their own emerging manufacturing industries that want to get a piece of the cake. Of course, they commercially they face some challenges here, but do you think they get some size, some part of the market with their own respective offerings?
Right. So there are three players that we can go through. The first one is Japan. Japan has one product available, or one product in the information called the Mitsubishi Superjet. That program has had delay after delay after delay, and quite honestly, there's a credibility problem, and no one knows actually when they're going to get one if you've ordered them. The U.S. airlines that ordered that airplane, one of the airlines has now gone bankrupt and closed down. The other one, SkyWest, is a huge company, and they are probably going to just wait and see. Mesa came through and put in an order, but it's a case, again, of wait and see, because the airplane that Mesa wants to take delivery of, it now appears may not even be built, with it to be the M100. So the Japanese are, shall we say, not especially credible as a supplier right now for a new regional jet. And since 70+% of the world's regional jets fly within the United States and are subject to scope clause, if you build a regional jet that is not able to be used in the United States, in a word, you're crazy, because the rest of the market is just too small.
And what's the market we could look at? Sorry, what's the value of the Bombardier? They acquired the Bombardier CRJ program, right?
Correct.
What value do you see them getting out of this deal?
Well, the saving thing for SpaceJet is probably the talent that they're getting at the CRJ program. There are people that have certified, sold, delivered, and provided support to airlines. Mitsubishi has never done that. And certainly the team at Mitsubishi have never done that. There may be people that used to be working for Bombardier or Boeing or whatever, but the fact is that team has not ever done the things that the new team in Montreal has done and continues to do. So it's going to be a substantial maturing of the team at SpaceJet, and we have to wait and see, because at the end of the month is when the deal closes, and then we start to see how the thing shakes out. And the big thing to watch there is the people. Who's going to go where and do what? Which roles are going to be in the future? Because that's going to tell us how the SpaceJet program evolves, and whether we can be more confident in any of their schedule information that they publish. The other market we want to talk about here is China. Now, what's interesting is a lot of people kind of maybe it stood by them, but the first market in the world to ground the MAX was China. The Chinese have the most rigorous airline safety regulations in the world. That's something that they should be, we should all recognize that that's a really powerful place for them to be. They have a very strong safety culture. What we see, though, is because of that safety culture, they are very deliberate in building commercial passenger airplanes. The ARJ21, which is for most people a copy of the 717 with more modern engines, is what I think was 14 years late. 14 years is like a half a generation in an airplane's life.
Yep.
Then we have the C919, which has gone much better, but is also going quite slowly in terms of progress. By the time that airplane comes into the market, like the ARJ21, it's going to be dated. Now, again, that's logic from January and February. The new logic starting this last month or two, we don't know what the new logic is going to look like. Do people really worry about the most modern fuel efficiency, or do they just they want something that's low cost and reliable? We don't know. The Chinese CR929, we're not quite sure how that's going to play out. It's too early to tell. The Chinese are playing the long game, and unfortunately, in the commercial airline world, they don't really have a long game, because as we can see, when a pandemic comes, the margins to stay in this business successfully are so low, and the capital cost is so high, it's enormously risky. So playing a long game in an airline business is hard. You need to keep generating cash to keep the business going. So for the Chinese, it's hard to tell how this is actually going to play out. Will it work out eventually? Yes, but it may take them 20 years, in which case everything that they have now is going to be irrelevant other than as a learning tool. Mm-hmm. The Russians with the MC-21, now there's a very interesting product. Firstly, the technology, much of the technology is Western, but they are able to learn from what they did with Superjet. Superjet was a good program, but didn't work out that very well because of things like product support. You know, Superjet doesn't have the wherewithal to do product support for the guys in for example, Mexico that are flying the Superjet. They had the same thing in Europe with CityJet. The plane should have worked. It's effective, it's low cost, it should have worked. But in the end, what does an airline do? They sell schedule. If they cannot deliver schedule, passengers get irritated. Passengers get irritated, they don't fly with that airline. And everybody loses money. It's back to that funnel. You have to offer a funnel that is reliable so that people will pour money into it. Superjet, unfortunately, fumbled on that. The MC-21, it looks to us to be a much more thought out program. The technologies on that airplane are state of the art. Sukhoi, that is the designers and the builders behind the plane, are as good as anybody in the world in terms of the design and functioning of an airplane. That airplane is going to be really great. But again, do the Russians have the industrialization in terms of the ability to build at rate, support the product when it's in service? There are concerns because, again, it's an unknown. They haven't, the Russians can be building the most superb airplane, but if they can't industrialize the program, it becomes difficult. You look at, for example, the Su-57. That is a state-of-the-art airplane in many ways, but it's taking a long time to get into service. So if you're Boeing and Airbus and Embraer, you look at the world out there and you say, okay, I'm not really worried right now, because the guys that are at the margin, at the edges, trying to get into the game, they don't have themselves. They're not really together. They don't have their stuff ready. So not a concern for certainly not another 10 years.
We'll see. So many unknowns at the moment.
Correct.
Yes, we will all have to wait for the next 6 months how things evolve, and then basically do the planning based on that. And I guess many analysts will be redrawing and redrafting all the analysis of the last few years based on the outcome of this pandemic. So we'll be looking forward then to continue reading your reports and your analysis or on AirInsight.com. And hopefully we'll be able to comment on the fast evolving situation sometime soon to see how things are going.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having me.
Thanks so much for being today here on the podcast, and hopefully speak to you soon.